Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. My name is Łukasz Stanek, and I'm professor of architecture history here at this university, and also the acting director of the Copernicus Center for Polish Studies. And I would like to welcome you to the first of 3 lectures which we bundled together under the umbrella Southeast. The title Southeast hints at a vector of exchanges between what, during the Cold War, was called Eastern Europe and what at that time began to be called the Global South. In other words, we are going to talk about long-distance exchanges that bypassed the colonial capitalist core in Western Europe, which conventionally was the very place that mediated the connections between what was outside of that core. And one of the many things that are remarkable about the Cold War is that it ruptured these mediations and opened the possibility of new connections between countries that were never or only occasionally connected before. And so in that framework of the Southeast series, we will talk about Poland and its Cold War era and broader opening towards African and Asian countries as they were becoming independent, whether through administrative decolonization or through independence struggle and independence wars. We are going to talk about political and economic links, but also cultural and artistic and sometimes very personal associations between Poland and these newly independent countries, some of them. By the end of socialism in Poland in 1989, these connections were actively forgotten. And the 3 people who will talk in the framework of the Southeast series will help us to unforget these exchanges, these mobilities, these associations. Our speakers include the journalist and writer Oliwia Bosłomtwe, the social anthropologist Kacper Pobłocki, and today the writer and curator Max Cegielski. And these combinations of professions and fields of practice is a message in itself. And to my mind, the message is that Poland's connections with the Global South are of interest to both scholars, but also to the broader public. And I believe that it is the case because of the current moment of great geopolitical reshuffling and great uncertainty. And in that moment, Poles are rethinking their place in the world. And these exchanges during the Cold War and the blind spot of these exchanges with Africans and Asians constitute an important lessons in this respect. And the first talk that will help us to rethink these connections and these matters will be delivered by Max Cegielski. Max will talk about Poland's socialist globalization. We are grateful to our co-sponsors, the Taubman College of Architecture and Urban Planning, the Center for Russian, East European and Eurasian Studies, the Weiser Center for Europe and Eurasia, the African Studies Center, and the International Institute. And I will keep Max's introductions very, very short because I know that he will walk you through his work today. Max is a writer and curator and researcher. He has authored several novels and non-fiction books. He's a member of the multidisciplinary group Polish People's Republic and the Global South at the Polish Academy of Sciences in Warsaw. Please join me in welcoming Max.
Thank you very much, Łukasz. Thank you very much for the invitation. I'm really happy to be here, and thank you very much for coming. I know the weather is so beautiful that I really appreciate it that you are here instead of, lying somewhere on the grass. And as Łukasz said, first of all, I'm a writer. I'm publishing books since 2003. Actually, this one called Masala was my very first one. It was a travelogue about India. And This book, for example, it was a non-fiction book about the Polish explorer in 19th century in Central Asia, who was a part of the so-called Great Game, which was, between Russians and British fight for the borders of Indian Empire. This one, called Prince Polonia, is the book that came out of one of the exhibitions that I did. I will tell you more about them. And it's actually a novel. It's a fiction about Polish smugglers smuggling electronics and gold between Singapore and India in 1980s. Very amazing story of the roots of Polish capitalism. And my last book, it's called Congo in Poland. It's an essay. It's a mixture of essay and travelogue and my family history. And it's I'm telling the story and thinking around Joseph Conrad, Heart of Darkness. So these are just few examples of my books, but all of them, as you can see, they are mostly about going to other places, but also I'm looking for the forgotten connections between these places and Poland nowadays. So I'm always digging into the stories who are about some global historic connections and histories. And it's same with the exhibitions that I am the curator of. And today I will concentrate on two projects. And one on the left here is it was the exhibition called Prince Polonia, or Polish Indian Shop, so I will talk about it. And also this one to my left, it's the project that I'm doing. I'm doing both of them with the visual artist. His name is Janek Simon, and it's still ongoing project called One Man Does Not Rule a Nation. And both of them, these were research-based exhibitions. So what we are basically showing during these shows is a mixture of different sort of archives, and both of them are connected to the subject of Poland's socialist globalization. But when we talk about socialist globalization, of course, the question is, what period are we talking about? And I think that the story really starts in 1955, during the Festival of Youth and Students, and the slogan of it was "For Peace and Friendship Against the Aggressive Imperialist Pacts." That was the full name of it. And it was the festival that happened in Warsaw in 1955. And to understand it, you have to remember that it's only 10 years after the end of the Second World War. So you have these amazing masses of young people coming from all over the world, but Warsaw, still half of the city is in ruins. So the war was finished in 1945, but then there was, of course, a time of Stalinism, so strict control on art as well, socialism. But this was a defining moment. In 1955, Stalin is already dead. In 1956, we'll have the political changes called the thaw, new political powers in Poland. But in 1955, as I said, 10 years after the war, you have more than 4,000 students from Africa, Asia, South America, and Middle East. So 4,000 young people of different from different cultures, with all their different cultures, and so on and so on. Except them, of course, many thousands of young students from USA as well, and the students from Western Europe. So it was probably the beginning or symbolic beginning of this new contacts of Polish contacts with the global world. And I like this photo very much because it's, in my opinion, very good symbol of what are we talking about. It's in Three Continents Club. It was a special place for students from the Global South studying in Poland, in Warsaw. And this slogan in the background, it says, "Future leaders from three continents pledge to bury colonialism, imperialism, and neocolonialism." And that was basically what it was about, you know. But also, I like this photo very much because it's exactly you have young people from different regions of the planet together in peaceful coexistence, you know, working on the same cause, yeah? And of course, one of the important elements of this process of socialist globalization was to establish a new language, a new discourse, I would even say, which will be non-racist, which will be based on equality of all races, equality of all the people from all around the world, yeah? And, oops, okay. So, in both of these exhibitions, me and Janek, we used this magazine, which is called Polish Review. The magazine was published from 1960 to 1970. As you can see here, the covers were designed by the best Polish artists. And in the 60s, we had a lot of them, amazing painters, designers, and so on and so on. There was also, there was an English version, Polish Review, and also French version called La Revue Polonaise. And this magazine was published and distributed only outside of Poland. So it's very hard to get it now, even in the, I mean, these are the copies from the National Library. It's very hard to buy it actually in Poland because it was distributed by the embassies, Polish offices, and so on. And this was probably the most important magazine to promote Poland abroad in 60s, but also to promote this new socialist approach towards Global South. Of course, there was one more magazine which was called Poland, which was, for example, which was for the audience in United States, but it was a very different one. And this one was especially for the audience in Asia and in Africa. So I'm showing this magazine because we used it during our exhibitions. As I said, the first one is called Polish Indian Shop, Prince Polonia. And this photo is from Museum of Modern Art in Warsaw, the old one. If you will be in Warsaw, you have to see the amazing new building of the Museum of Modern Art. It was just opened a year ago. Please come. It's really cool place. But this was in the old one. So as I said, it's based on the archives, but also here you can, for example, this part is about Polish fascinations with the Indian spirituality. So, for example, you have here the author of it. His name was Erwin Sówka. He was a worker from south of Poland. He never been to India, but he was painting Shiva, Krishna, and so on. Sometimes against the background of Polish towns. And here, for example, is the Polish Indian Fraternity Society. It was very powerful organization, also promoting, exchange between Poland and India. And here, this is one of the first Polish yoga masters already from the 60s. So yoga was very popular in Poland in the 60s, as it was here probably. But as you know, Poland was on the other side of the Iron Curtain. But still, because of this political, economic, and cultural exchanges with India, there was a lot of yoga as well. And it's also in the Museum of Modern Art. And this one, it was another version of this exhibition in Bombay, in the artistic place called Clark House. And and this, we can move to this one, because as you can see, there was this cartoon of the Polish Prime Minister Cyrankiewicz riding an elephant in India, because he went to India in '56. So this Polish magazine called Szpilki, in English it's, I think, Sewing Pins, and it was like a cartoon, caricature, jokes magazine, was somehow joking about it, showing that the real communists are acting as the Maharajas in India riding elephants. So, and here is a version of the exhibition in Szczecin, where in the Szczecin shipyard, Szczecin shipyard built ships for India. So, for example, we were showing the model of one of the ships for India. And I think that when we talk about socialist globalization, we have political ties, we have economic ties, and we have culture ties. Yeah, these are at least three elements of it. And here is also Szczecin. And when I said that these are research-based exhibitions, I don't mean only paper archives. As you can see, we were showing this scooter, a real one from the 60s. It's called OSA scooter. So me and Janek Simon, when we think about looking for the archives, we mean all sorts of the archives, also objects, paraphernalia, etc., etc. And yeah, but why OSA at the exhibition about Polish-Indian relations? Because Polish scooter OSA, which was of course socialist copy of the famous Lambretta Italian scooter, which was a very cool one. So of course there was a socialist version of this scooter, and it was exported to India. So here you can see that it's from one of the Indian magazines, actually, this photo. So we have a young lady, a symbol of New India on the Polish scooter. But on the other hand, there is this other photo where you have Polish riders. They went to India with these scooters for sort of safari race, to prove that the Polish scooters are good enough for the Indian roads, of course. So it was a sort of promotion as well. But I'm showing this to you because I think that this photo has this sort of Oriental twist in it, yeah. So that's why sometimes we don't say socialist globalization, but in terms of culture and visual materials and so on, we talk about socialist Orientalism, yeah, because to show the Indian villagers as a symbol of tradition next to the Polish scooter, it has this Oriental element in it, of course. But on the other hand, I think that this is very typical juxtaposition that was used at this time to show traditional life, traditional elements, religion, villagers in India, for example, but juxtaposed with these new elements of the modernity coming from the socialist country. Yeah. And Polish Review was building up this sort of discourse, promoting, like here, you know, Polish modernity, and in a way promising to these other new countries in Africa and Asia that if you follow socialist modernization rules, you can be like this. Yeah? Of course, atoms as well, so and so on. But as you can see, I mean, I like it very much. I hope you too, because the design of this magazine was quite big format. So it was not a cheap propaganda. It was really designed in a nice way. The best photographers were doing photos and so on. And the articles were like this: Polish glass made in India, for example. But again, the problem was that, like at this photo, usually in all these materials, there was only one direction of transmitting knowledge. So as here, you have Polish engineers who are in avant-garde of this new world, showing to their Indian co-workers, students in a way, you know, how we can build the future together. But it's always like Poles leading other nations towards better future. So again, I think this is it has this Oriental twist. When I say Oriental, I mean like in Edward Said, yeah, Orientalism, of course. And these elements like this, they were not only in the Polish Review. Here is the example from Polish television a little bit later, 71. And the title of this reportage is Our People on the Ganges. So it's also, again, our people, we Poles on the Ganges. And the narration goes like Polish consultants solve problems, etc., etc. So with all the positive elements of these exchanges, we have to remember that there was always a problem of this language, of this new language, how to talk about these connections. And it's again from the Polish Review magazine. It was not only about India, but like here, Arab friends training in Polish factory and so on. And here is Algerian soldiers. So, I mean, it was a real help. For example, in this case, free hospitals, free treatment for the Algerian soldiers who were fighting for independence at this time. And at our exhibitions, we use these magazines, first of all, to build up sort of timeline, to show through the covers which year we are in. And here is Polish Review and Przekrój magazine, and as you can see, it's Nehru and actually his daughter Indira Gandhi, surrounded by the Polish Red Pioneers. But of course, what we are doing, we are also working with the local archives. For example, in India, we are not using only Polish archives, but also Indian archives to show all of this from the Indian perspective. And also, this is illustrated Weekly of India and Przekrój, and we have Lenin on both covers. at about same time, because it's hard to imagine now, but India was a very socialist country from the beginning until 90s. So this timeline was sort of similar to this one in Poland, you know, which stopped to be a socialist country in 89, beginning of 90s. So this exhibition was about these Polish-Indian connections, but also about these parallels between two countries which are so far away from each other, but still there are some similar elements. And now to the other exhibition. The project is called One Man Does Not Rule a Nation. Me and Janek Simon, we are curators of it. And the first version, it was in Ljubljana, a very small installation. And what is the story about? It's about this 1775 feet sword monument dedicated to Kwame Nkrumah in Ghana. And for example, if you know Professor Łukasz Stanek book about the architecture in global socialism, this photo was in this book. And here maybe we have to also to mention that in this case, Ghana is becoming this third space. As Łukasz Stanek wrote many years ago, but I'm quoting it because for me it was very important inspiration, south of East-West. So we have East-West division, Cold War division between capitalist countries and socialist countries. There is an Iron Wall, there is a Cold War, it's a conflict, but south of it, in the global south, suddenly there is like a new space emerging where anything can happen, where new ideas can be developed, and so on and so on. And so that's the Sword Monument. This is the photo from May '65 when it was unveiled in Winneba. It's a coastal town in Ghana. And the unveiling ceremony happened during, or even especially for the opening of 4th Afro-Asian People's Solidarity Conference. And this solidarity movement between Africa and Asia was one of the results of the Bandung Conference. Again, a third way, a different way to connect people, not in a capitalistic way or socialist way, but just in a new way of decolonization. And Kwame Nkrumah unveiled this monument. It was next to the very important place at this time in Ghana. It was Nkrumah Ideological Institute, the buildings you can see in the background. And what was the monument about? It was dedicated to Nkrumah, but in a broader context of decolonization in Africa, because Ghana was a place very important for this process. And Kwame Nkrumah, he was an ideological leader of many different ideas for the decolonization. So it's for his selfless, uncompromising ideological leadership in the struggle for Africa's emancipation and unity. But, yeah, and here's the cover, Evening News, May '65. All Ghanaian newspapers were covering this monument, the conference, the doom of imperialism is assured. Of course, it never happened. But so it was unveiled in May '65, and then in February '66, so just only after a few months, it was completely demolished, this monument. Because in February '66, army took over, there was coup d'etat. Now we know that for sure it was inspired by the CIA, MI6, and all these imperial powers and so on. And because this monument was such a powerful symbol of Nkrumah ideas, so that's why it was completely demolished. So it was there only for a few months. And this is the photo from Google Maps. This is this square. As you can see, it's completely empty. Winneba is like Ann Arbor in the tropics. I mean, so try to imagine that your campus is on the coast of Atlantic Ocean, beautiful palm trees, and you have Michigan, but in this with this sort of nature. So the university is still there, but the monument is no more. It's like here, I mean, the university is like the most important part of the town. There are thousands of students and so on. And the square where it was, where the monument was, now it looks like this. So the base is there, the staircase are there, everything is like ready, but it's a void. It's total emptiness. And so our project was, we were trying to fill it up somehow. So this is a version of our installation in Szczecin, in Trafo Center for Contemporary Art. And as you can see, we somehow rebuilt this base in wood, and we are displaying many different archival objects about this monument, about Kwame Nkrumah, about socialist globalization. So it tells the story of these Polish-Ghanaian contacts. But so yeah, it looks like this basically. But what is the connection between the monument and Poland? Of course, this is the question. It was designed by the Polish sculptress. And so at the exhibition, we contacted her family. So we did interviews about Alina Ślesińska was her name, about her stay in Ghana. We showed her contract that she signed with Kwame Nkrumah government and so on. So that's her, Alina Ślesińska, Polish sculptress. At the end of 50s, beginning of 60s, she was so famous as Alina Szapocznikow, which became later like a big star. And what Alina Ślesińska was doing, she was drawing this and making sculptures of these amazing buildings. I mean, these are the buildings, if you can't imagine it. And she called them propositions for architecture. So like sculptural objects that actually were supposed to be buildings in the future. This collage is made by the very famous Polish photographer Eustachy Kosakowski to try to show how this building by Alina Ślesińska will look with the landscape. So she was a visionary artist, definitely. You know, she wanted to change the world, and that's probably why Kwame Nkrumah, who wanted to change the world as well, that's why he invited her to make his monument. So that's Alina working in Ghana. She was there for a year and a half. And this is also a version of this installation that we did in Tamale, Ghana. It's north of Ghana. It's a studio of the artist. His name is Ibrahim Mahama. He was actually #1 on Art Review list of the most important artists last year. He's a big star of the Ghanaian art scene, and so as you can see, his studio is like a huge factory. It's really big. So the project that started in Ljubljana, then it was in Poland, and then it was in Tamale, also in Accra, smaller. This is still Tamale. And from what is important, from Ghanaian point of view, this is like a lost heritage. So because the monument was completely demolished, because when the army took power, the books and magazines about Nkrumah, they were burnt on the street and so on. So it seems that our project, it gave the Ghanaians possibility to have their heritage back, which is of course Polish Ghanaian heritage, Polish artists and so on. And this is another, because we also did it in the Museum of African Art in Belgrade. So as you can see, we are also, of course, using Ghanaian archives. Nkrumah is still very popular in Ghana, so you can buy a T-shirt with him. We're showing postcards from 60s from Ghana, showing modernization of Ghana, Pan-African magazines, and so on and so on. And also all the items produced by the Polish companies to promote themselves in Ghana. Of course, the monument was designed, it happened because of Nkrumah connections to Poland. Here he's visiting Poland in 61. Of course, as you know, again, from Łukasz Stanek book, there were many Polish architects working in Ghana. So this connection between Poles and the modernization of Ghana is very important one, and people still remember it. I mean, yeah. Especially because of all these books and projects and so on. So, yeah, also for this show, One Man Does Not Rule a Nation, again, we were using La Revue Polonais, which was at this time trying to establish new discourse about Africa, which was still unknown, but it was close. Here is again an article, Friends from Accra visiting Warsaw in 63. But again, it has this element that there is this Polish guy showing them, that's how we do it. You can do it as well. And from end of 50s, more and more students from Africa, from India, and so on, coming to Polish universities. But again, I'm showing this, it's 59, it's postcard from Africa, the juju man or the sorcerer on the scooter. So again, you have this oriental element, this element of exotization, yeah, but it's again this juxtaposition, sorcerer and the scooter. So in these visuals, in these narratives, you need these elements of tradition to show the modernity. And in 63, there was this magazine called Africa, published in Poland, very serious one about the politics in Africa, about the decolonization. Here you have Kenyatta, for example, from Kenya. And in 64, another magazine was established by the government called Continents, which was a more popular one because sometimes to get audience, the covers were like this, but on the other hand, like here, this is a photo of the new emerging workers class in Ghana, again juxtaposed with the traditional elements. And I think that crisis in Congo, end of 1960, was a very important moment to establish these institutions and this discourse. At the beginning, there were like very official demonstrations against the Belgians in Congo. But then when Lumumba was killed in 61, yeah, I know I'm moving from Ghana to Congo, but that's what I'm working on now. And I think that it was the turning point. So when Lumumba got killed, Polish and African students stormed the Belgian embassy, and there was a great diplomatic scandal because of it. And Polish magazine called Polityka established Lumumba Fund, and people from all over the country started to give the money for this fund, and the money later on went for the students to come to Poland. So, because I'm mentioning it because sometimes when we talk about socialist globalization or when we talk about socialism, because we know that there was no democracy, so all these magazines, all these institutions were established by the government, of course, as a part of official politics. But I think that the Lumumba case is showing that it was not only official propaganda, that they were like real emotions, for example, in this case, positive emotions. And very good example of it also is this book, Lumumba and His Country, it's called, written by Marian Turski, who was a Holocaust survivor and very important person in terms of Polish-Jewish relations and so on and so on. And he never been to Congo, but he wrote a book about Lumumba, and all the money from the book went to Lumumba Fund. So there was this, maybe it's a question of generations, but from his point of view, somebody who survived the Second World War and Holocaust, all these things going on in Africa, they were really close for him, very important. And so that's something that I'm working on now. And just one example, because I'm not sure how it was here in the United States, but there is just one example, a small demonstration in New York when Patrice Lumumba, the first prime minister of Congo, when he was killed by Belgians, generally. And I'm almost finishing, but just to give you to show you one more area where socialist globalization was happening. With Janek Simon, we also just started to work on the project about Polish relations with Iraq. So here is Iraq from Polish Review magazine. And the very important person for relations between Poland and Iraq was Roman Artymowski, amazing artist. Actually, he was also the author of many of these covers of Polish Review magazine, and his wife, Zofia, and they were in Baghdad for 10 years. And they established the Academy of Fine Arts in Baghdad. So it's maybe like with the gentrification processes in towns. First you are sending artists, you know, and then when the artists, when they establish, you know, good atmosphere, then the business is coming afterwards. So yeah, so it was Artymowski in Iraq. They had many students, so you have now amazing, that there is the whole generation of the Iraqi artists who are the students of Zofia and Roman. But when I said that the economics follow, this is 80s, when the Polish company called Dromex, they were usually these X in these names, Polimex, Dromex, and so on. Dromex company was building in Iraq for Saddam Hussein highway number 1. So it was like about 100 kilometers of the best highway in the world at the time when in Poland there were no highways. It was always a problem with building new roads, new bridges, etc. But when there was political connection, but business as well, and then the Romex and also many other companies, also American ones, Japanese ones, and so on, they made these amazing highways through the desert. And then when Iraqi war happened, we Poles with the Americans, we destroyed them, of course, with the tanks and so on. But this is like another area. I'm not sure how the situation is gonna be, so, but I hope that we'll work on it. And yeah, so of course, my presentation was about many different places. It was based not so much on the academic methodology and so on, but more on the exhibitions. So in the title there was Poland's Socialist Globalization, but it's a question. I mean, is it the best term to call this long process? Maybe socialist Orientalism is also a proper one, or maybe socialist post-colonialism. Of course, maybe it's a question because when we speak about political relations, maybe we should call it socialist globalization. When we talk more about culture, for example, about books, about Kapuściński books, about Africa, about magazines and so on, then maybe we can call it socialist Orientalism. Some scholars are calling it socialist post-colonialism. As you see, I'm open to discussion, like what it was. As a writer or journalist, I would say that it was a very positive process. It was a very interesting example, especially now, of course, you know. If I will talk more in academic terms, don't judge. I will just say that it was like this and like this. But I find it quite fascinating, and I hope you will find it like this too. Thank you very much. If you have... So if you have any comments, questions...
Thanks a lot, Max. I think it's very refreshing to see these processes from the point of view of objects, from the point of view of covers and magazines and industrial objects and these bigger objects like sculptures or highways. There is space and time for discussion and questions. I might ask the first while you are thinking about yours. So, you know, when I had my first exhibition on the architects from Poland who worked abroad, including Ghana and Iraq, in Warsaw 16 years ago, I talked to many people who did do these travels, and a lot of them were very worried about this exhibition. They were very concerned about how their involvement in these so-called export projects would be perceived by their peers. They were very worried that they would be somehow associated with socialism and that there would be some association made between their involvement abroad and some kind of compromise that they were supposedly forced to propose. And so my question is this. So that was 16 years ago. The exhibition did happen. People were interested, but people were definitely worried. And I was wondering what was the response to your exhibition in Poland, the one in Szczecin, and the broader debate? Do you think that there is a different sense and a different interpretation and different view on these processes 16 years later?
Yeah, I think it's very important what you are talking about, but I think it's because you were the first one. I mean, you opened these dams, you opened these topics for the audience, and I think that now it's different. However, I remember, you know, when we opened our exhibition in the Museum of Modern Art, and me and Janek as curators were giving, like, organizing walks, showing to people, you know, all these elements. And you are right in the way that they were not saying it loud, but they were saying, like, whispering to us, yeah, I was a smuggler, or yeah, I was engineer in one of these mines, yeah. So they were maybe a little bit afraid of talking about it openly and loud, but I think it changed very much. Also because, as you are well aware, a lot of the architects that you made interviews with them, they are already dead, or they are very old, and I think that now they want. I mean, if they are still alive, that they want to talk about it, yeah, because they feel that it will be too late. And also, I think that the general approach, atmosphere towards Polish architecture, towards socialism, towards all this export and so on, that it really changed since 16 years old, yeah. But I think, again, it was a process, as this socialist globalization was a process as well. The things are not happening just like this, but you need time, you know, for the ideas to go, to be accepted, and so on. Yeah. So it will be my answer. But I'm, on the other hand, I'm afraid that maybe next 5 years it will be a taboo again, you know, because it always depends on the political situation. Always. I mean, when we talk about the history, we are usually, in a way, talking about the present, because what we think about now, it's also changing our opinions about the past. So maybe in a way we don't have a history, but many different histories that are changing in time, I would say.
Well, thank you very much. It was very, very interesting. But for some people like myself who were raised in the communist system, there is a big white elephant in the room that we are not talking about, right? In order to get out of Poland for the artists, it was not easy. You couldn't get out of Poland. You couldn't go abroad. You couldn't get passport to go abroad. So all those people who were able to go to third countries were already privileged, and there was a price for it. They had to project certain image. So you are not addressing that, I guess, on purpose, but I wonder if you can do it, because the energy behind, the financing behind was all KGB propaganda. Developed in Soviet Union, reverberated in Poland, but is projected into the third world countries, including the phenomenal meeting of all the young people. It was just a matter of influencing young people from third countries, saying, look, socialism is good, capitalism is bad. The other question is, however, I noticed that you have projected the images where the Poles were always in the position of teaching and showing. And I was wondering if this is a result of any society needs the others. So Poles had terrible complex toward the West, because in 76 it was already known that socialism is not going to make it, and they're going to lose to capitalism. And I was wondering if those people going there and picturing themselves were like looking for others that they can say, oh, they are worse than us, and we are not that bad after all. Thanks.
Yeah. I mean, I understand your comment. I understand it very well, and of course, in a way, you are right. I would say, but you know, that's why. I mean, because of the Cold War, of course, it was not so easy to go to Paris or to go to United States. But that's why I was trying to show you this third possibility, because even when I went for the first time to India in '99, as a Pole, I went there without visa, because for Polish people, you don't need visa, you know. What I'm trying to say, that it was probably more easy to go to India in '80s than to emigrate to United States, you know. And for example, Polish Airlines, a lot, there was a 3 times a week that direct flight from Warsaw to New Delhi in '80s, you know. And of course, it was not a real economical solution, because the company was, of course, sponsored by the government. But still, the flights were full, you know, because of all this smuggling business, but also Polish engineers going to India, and so on and so on. So I think that, of course, all of this, it was a part of general Soviet Union politics towards global South. But as many scholars already showed, Moscow also gave a lot of freedom to different socialist countries. And what was in a way funny, that Polish companies were competing, for example, in Ghana or in India, with Czechoslovak companies and Russian companies and so on. So it was not, you know, that somebody in an office on Kreml was sitting and saying, you Poles, you will go to Ghana, and you East Germans, you will do something else. But that's why it was in a way this third space, because communist countries, socialist countries were competing against each other to have contracts, as it was with this highway, for example, in Iraq. It was a proper, open contest who will get this contract, you know, and Dromex company was fighting against, you know, German companies and so on. So it was always a very strange. I mean, you are right, of course, that it was generally, it was the way that socialist bloc wanted to present to the others, but still there were many different levels, different areas, different competitions. For example, about Ghana, the famous magazine called The Economist, you know, wrote about Polish engineers in Ghana. That and the journalist from the West, he was like surprised, because he was saying they are not Marxist at all. And he was like, why they are not Marxists at all? Of course, because they were out of Poland, so they can be not so Marxist, yeah? But on the other hand, this guy from Economist, he was writing, they are not racist. Why? You know? And they were like surprised, because of course, from the perspective of the government in India or the government in Ghana, if you have two choices to have an English company or Polish company, you will choose the Polish one, because there is no story of colonialism behind it. Yeah. So, and also I think that every country, every 10 years, did a little bit different with the architects, a little bit different with the artists, a little bit different with the engineers, and so on and so on. Yeah, that every case you have to research fully to be able what was really a game about. But also when you see Roman Artymovsky works from Iraq, there is no socialism in it. It's like, you know, his works from this time are very, I mean, maybe here are more the works of the students. But actually, when you see his and Zofia works, it's like pure abstraction, inspired by some old ruins and so on and so on. But it's not, you know, it's not socialism, you know, it's just art, but inspired by Iraq in this case. Yeah, so it would be my answer. Thank you.
So I'm not sure if you can talk about that, but I was wondering if you could give us a little bit more context to the 40 years of socialism in Poland and how, over time, the approach of the Polish government has changed to the what we call today's global South, so 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if there's a story that can be told there. How and was there a focus on certain parts of the world and certain time, and what was the motivation in different decades? And the other question, obviously we live in very different times today. Polish companies have a lot of international relations, and there's a ton of tourism coming out of Poland. But I wonder, is there a policy? What is the Polish government's policy to the global South today? If there's one.
Okay, I'm afraid that there is no policy at all. You know, when we did these exhibitions in Ghana, in Accra, and in Tamale, they were actually sponsored by the Polish. It's called Mickiewicz Institute. It's the special Polish institution, public one, with the budget to promote Polish culture abroad. And of course, they are sponsoring Polish artists' exhibitions in Paris, London, Venice Biennial, etc., etc. But it was actually the very first time since 60 years when they did anything in sub-Saharan Africa, all of Africa. Yeah. Also because it was the exhibitions were in Ghana in 2025, so it was exactly, you know, anniversary of the unveiling of the monument. And but I think it's changing because, as you know, as there was Ghanaian President John Mahama speaking at the United Nations a few times. Last time there was this resolution about the Atlantic slave trade. But every time when he's at the United Nations, he is always saying the future belongs to Africa. So I think that maybe even Polish government slowly starts to understand it, that you have to think about the global South as well. But I think that maybe this is also another answer to what Łukasz was asking, that in Poland we tend to think about Poland. I mean, it's normal. I mean, I think probably people in the United States, they tend to think about the United States. You know, I mean, you stay with your thoughts where you are. This is the most important thing. But I think it's changing. Concerning the first part of your question, of course, it was a very dynamic process. And for example, after '68, because the Polish government expelled Polish Jews, and it was, of course, a very tragic situation because we lost also a lot of intellectuals who were, for example, from the Polish School of the Development, etc. But because it was a time of new Arab regimes, for example, Gaddafi in Libya, and of course, Gaddafi had, you know, a lot of good petrodollars, yeah. And actually, his idea was that if you want to make business with Libya, you have to sponsor Palestinians as well. So, for example, you know, in Poland in '74, we opened one of the first embassies of the Palestinian non-existing state. Yeah, and it was, so I think that, for example, you can say that '60s were much more oriented towards Africa, but for example, '70s were much more oriented to Middle East, to Palestinian cause, and so on and so on. Then, of course, in the '80s, the problem was that the Polish economy was falling down completely. There was just no money. So that's why also this Dromex history in the '80s is so strange, because at this time in Poland we had, you know, like nothing on the shelves in the shops almost, yeah. So we have Polish company building this amazing highway, and on the other hand, you just can't buy, you know, everyday food in Poland. So these were, of course, the contradictions, and I think that's what you were also talking about, yeah. And of course, for Alina Ślesińska to go to Ghana, for Roman Artymowski to go to Iraq, it was a amazing, wonderful way of escaping Poland, you know. And in the way, for Alina Ślesińska, maybe also for many architects, Ghana was like a West, you know. So I mean, it was so good as the West, in a way. And I think, I mean, Artymowscy in Baghdad, they had a very good life and so on, much better than in Warsaw. For example, Kruma policies were like this, that the architects, they had their own bungalows, yeah. In Warsaw, it was very hard to have a flat, yeah, because still of the Second World War and so on and so on. So if in Warsaw you have 30 meters flat, and then in Ghana you have a bungalow and a car and the servants, you know, it's nice, yeah. So I think my general answer is that you can't write a general history of the Polish socialist globalization from 55 to 89, because every 10 years it was different. Also because global politics, you know, they were different in different times. So it was always, of course, a context. Yeah.
I was wondering if you could speak to the relationship of the Polish Socialist Republic to the People's Republic of China. I'm wondering, especially given the difficulties of the Sino-Soviet split and the polarization among the socialist camp that caused, even that set aside, I guess I'm wondering if that relationship was different, say, to many of these non-aligned countries throughout the global South.
I have to admit, I'm not a specialist on China, you know. For sure, there was more connections before the split, yeah. So you had Polish artists going to China and also to Vietnam as well. But then, because Moscow changed its policies towards China, so of course Poland had to follow. It's again this question. I mean, it was not possible to do something against, you know, the general Russian politics. Yeah. So yeah. So with China after the split, we're no friends anymore. That's the answer.
Yeah. Hi. Just wanted to say that it's so exciting to have you here, Max. You know, I'm myself journalist from Poland, so if you don't know, Max is a real living legend of Polish journalism and culture. So kudos for Professor Stanek for inviting you. And I have one reflection and one maybe question and / reflection as well. So yeah, I was thinking about what Sir said a couple of minutes ago about how to and what you just displayed here, you know, how to call it, because like I have myself here like the lecture 10 days ago, and a part of this was like the Russia as a colonial state, but Russia as a colonial state it's also like the problem of Soviet Union as a colonial power, and the Eastern Bloc as a colonial power, and Polish People Republic was the part of that. So what was that? Like I was thinking, I'm thinking about that all the time. Were we a kind of colonial power, like sending people there, or yeah, what's that? So it's like maybe we have to still think about some new terms, new language. Do you want to come? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I think of course there was. As I said, that's why I wanted to be, and I'm always trying to be critical. That's why I was showing you this Oriental elements in it, this problem of exotism. But, you know, I think that it's a great difference between this narration and actually having a colonies like Britain and so on. And that's why, of course, Polish Review magazine, in almost every issue, was reminding the audience in Africa and Asia, we never had colonies. And actually, it was true. You know, I mean, of course, before a Second World War, in 30s, there was something that was called Polish Colonial League, but it was more a dream, a fantasia, or, you know, of to have the colonies, but Poland never had colonies, yeah? And so, of course, it was the part of this, it was important argument. And the people in Ghana and India, they agree, you know, you had no colonies, you are better than English, you know, Germans and so on and so on. Because that's why, I mean, when you, economy is not only about business, it's also about emotions and how you perceive the people, you know, the English, Spanish, and so on, and so on. They were the old colonial powers, and Poland was not. On the other, I mean, also what is important that Poland was colonized in 19th century as well, yeah, because maybe some of you don't know, in 19th century there was no Poland on the map because one part of Poland was taken by Russia, the second one by Prussia, Germany, and the third one by Austria. And again, in Polish Review, in many articles, also Kapuściński, a famous Polish journalist, when he was working in Africa, when he was in Congo, for example, in 1960, he was always talking about it. We never had colonies, we were colonized, that's why we understand you, you know? And of course, you can call it propaganda, but I think that there is really something more to it. And that the approach of the people from Poland towards people in Africa and so on was really different than the approach, the attitude of English people, Germans, etc., etc. Because if you have no colonies, I mean, of course, it doesn't mean that there is racism in Poland as well, because it's everywhere in a way, yeah? But still, if you have no colonies, then you don't have this sort of matrix, yeah, in your mind. When you start, you know, relations, you are different, you know, because your background is different and your history is different. I'm not saying that Poles were only good people and so on, but still, this is a different history, so different approach as well. Yeah.
Since I'm the one who's conveying this lecture series, I feel that I do need to say something in this moment. I think that also based on my own scholarship, I do feel that just as we need to qualify that kind of criticism of these exchanges as simply a result of Soviet geopolitics, so we need to qualify that story of Poland as an anti-colonial power. And you are very right. I mean, that was the narrative that was very broadly proposed to the newly independent countries, to Ghana, to Nigeria as well. But there was also people, Africans, who countered that view. These were people who had very direct exchanges with Eastern Europeans through, for example, their studies, where they experience all sorts of attitudes that were precisely conveying a sense of European understanding of a hierarchy of nations. And of course, there is this whole story, which is very important, about Poland's internal colonization, right? And so the understanding of the so-called Eastern territories in the interwar period, of today's Lithuania, Ukraine, and Belarus, where it was explicitly seen as a colonial territory, where Kapuscinski's own family, right, was part of these colons. And that's an interesting thing about him, that while he is Kapuscinski is that journalist who was mentioned by Max, who traveled to Africa and Asia as part of that Polish exchange with these countries. Kapuscinski, when speaking, when experiencing sub-Saharan Africa, Tanzania, Ghana, and so on, he realized that he grew up on a colonized territory. That's his word. So it's the experience of Africa made him realize something about Poland, and that was very much against that narrative of Poland not being a colonizing power. The Polish presence in the East was, and that has been studied, as you know, was clearly part of a civilizing mission that had everything to do with the understanding of Europe as that epistemic space, as that space that is a civilizing proposal for the others. And of course, you have shown Joseph Conrad. Joseph Conrad is, on the one hand, that person who, through that Polish experience, criticized colonialism, but at the same time, the very fact that he was able to make a career within a colonial economy also says a lot about the positionality of the Poles in the 19th century. So I think that it is a complex story, and I will end with one last comment, that it was very well understood by the Africans themselves, by the educated Africans themselves, and Azikiwe, the Nigerian president, as a young journalist, in the interwar period, he mocked these Polish fantasies about Poland as a colonial power. So I think it is very important to see that this was a negotiation, that was a claim that was made to the newly independent countries, but that claim was often rejected, that claim of anti-colonialism.
I would just say that generally I agree, but we can, you can write PhD about it. So, I mean, it's very complicated because still internal colonialism is something very different than the full-scale colonialism. Of course, I mean, we can use same terms, colonialism, but still, it doesn't work the same way exactly, So I think we can discuss it all night.
Okay, I want to make a comment. In 2004, I had an opportunity to attend Summer University of Polish Culture in Rome at the Institute of John Paul II. And there was a professor from the University of Cardinal Wyszyński from Warsaw, lecturing about the history of art. Maybe you know the name, I forgot. And among others was talking about the architecture and contribution of Polish architects to the world architecture, showing amazing buildings, breakthrough solutions, and especially in the United States. So not only Ghana, Africa, India, but also was United States and France. So this is my comment. Thank you.
Thank you. I mean, I think that we had very good architects, so that's why. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I work on Yugoslavia and non-alignment, and so I was interested to see that you talked about Polish painters being inspired by like India's spiritualism, right? And yoga is a big thing and all this. So I was just wondering, like in Yugoslavia at the time, especially in the 70s and 80s, there was a lot of anxiety about this kind of re-exoticization of India. Like a lot of literary critics, philosophers, like people who did religious studies, right, who tried to kind of de-exoticize India through like responsible scholarship and like a socialist, you know, non-aligned perspective, were really anxious about what they saw as like Western gurus monetizing on India's spiritualism. And of course, because it was so popular among young people, they were critical of that, that tendency, and they felt that their work was being undone. So I was just wondering like whether there was anxiety about that in Poland, whether it was seen as also not something that a socialist, not the way that a socialist country should see India, right? Like now through this like, you know, exotic spiritualism.
Thank you. I mean, of course, you know, non-aligned Yugoslavian policies were also, as you know, a very important factor in all these political games with 1961 Belgrade Conference and so on. But when it comes to India, I think that the problem was in a way different than Polish-Indian fraternity society was established because of the political socialist relations, but it started to be a sort of I mean, it was very official, but it started to be very hippie place, you know, and that's why I think it was so attractive for people in Poland. Actually, there was the Indian club in Warsaw, which where you know, musicians were going to. Also, you had yoga classes, but also what was very interesting, some theosophic books being smuggled from India to Poland, you know, and distributed through this official club without the censorship. And as we know, all these theosophical schools, they can be quite dangerous for the governments, I mean, yeah? Because there was this Polish lady that migrated, that moved to India in 30s. Now I forgot her name, but we are also showing it in at our exhibition. And she was translating very amazing Buddhist theosophical books to Polish in India. She was printing them in India, and then she was sending them to this Indian club without any control, you know, which of course from the point of view of the socialist government is something they don't like, you know, to. So in a way, I think this was the main challenge for Polish government, that because of all these strong ties with India, this Polish-Indian society was developed, but it was very free place, you know. So they were sending secret agents there, you know. They were trying to have it under control, but how to have under control, you know, crazy theosophical, you know, people. So I think that's why our exhibition, first part of it was about official contacts, and then the second part was about unofficial contacts. Because thanks to these official ties and relations, smugglers, yoga, all the strange things happened, you know. But because India was such an important friend of Poland, so they had to allow it, you know. And I think this was the main problem. I mean, in Poland, I don't know how it was with Yugoslavia, maybe some different, you know, yeah.
Okay, we have room for one more question or comment.
You mentioned, as far as Polish colonial ambitions, you mentioned this organization. In free translation, it was called Maritime and Colonial League. And they tried to collect money to buy colony in Africa.
Yeah.
Absolutely stupid idea.
That's right. I agree. But that's why I said it was more, you know, like opera fantasy, because then 39 happened and all the government of Poland just escaped. So I mean, you know, and suddenly all these big projects and visions, they completely collapsed. So yeah.
Thank you so much, Max, and thank you for this discussion.
Thank you very
There is
much.
more coming.